Hi, this is lecture 4 on chapter 27. I'm going to be talking about different altered dominant chords, chords that involve either a raised fifth of the chord or a lowered fifth of the chord. And in order to do this, I'm going to go to my handout and we'll be moving on to a later example in the handout. I'd like to look at page 4 of the chapter 27 chords handout. If you look at this example 2 on page 4, it shows you some 5 chords in C major, and the first couple of them have their fifth raised, and then the next 2 have their fifth lowered. Let's take a look at the 4 examples from example 2. So here in the first measure, in the key of C major, we have a 5 triad, except that the fifth of the chord has been altered. The D is going up to the E, and to make it have even more of an attraction towards the E, the D has been raised so that what we have is an augmented triad. And the way to show an augmented triad is to show the Roman numeral with a plus sign to show that it's not major, but it's augmented. We therefore have 2 different leading tone motions. We have the T going to Do, and we have the Re going up to Me. This 5 augmented triad is something that you pretty much only see in major keys, because having that double leading tone with the raised scale degree 2 leading to scale degree 3 is something that only works in major. If we had an E flat as the extra note in the chord, it would be resolving as a common tone, and we'd probably call the chord something different. In letter B, we have the same chord, except now it has a 7th added. Please note that this notation does not mean that there's an augmented 7th in the chord. It means that it is a 5 augmented triad with an added 7th. Notice the augmented 6th interval between the chordal 7th, F, and the raised scale degree 2, the D sharp. These resolve by contrary chromatic motion to the third of the one chord. Letter C is different. Letter C is a 5-7 chord, and instead of having a raised fifth, it has a lowered fifth. It uses the note Ra to lead more strongly and more effectively down to the C. My preference is to call this chord a 5-7 flat 5 chord. That says exactly what it is, and it's very straightforward. It's a 5-7 chord with a lowered fifth. Notice again that we have an augmented 6th or diminished 3rd interval in this chord. The D flat and the B natural make a diminished 3rd or diminished 10th, and they resolve by contrary half-step motion to the octave Cs in the chord of resolution. Letter D shows this chord with some of the voices reorganized. It's now appearing in the 2nd inversion, with the D flat in the bass, the G in the tenor, and the B natural in the soprano. When we write the chord like this, it's revealed to be a French augmented 6th chord, but transposed so that instead of leading to a 5 chord, it leads to a 1 chord. The D flat goes down by half step to C, the B natural goes up by half step to C. You can see perhaps that this would be the French augmented 6th chord if we were in the key of F major or F minor. It would have the lay, which is D flat, it would have the do, which is F, it would have the re, which is G, and then it would have the B natural, which is Phi. By labeling it a French augmented 6th chord, but one that's going to 1 instead of 5, again, it makes it pretty clear what it's going to. I'd like to talk a little bit about Mr. Roig-Frankoli's labels for the chords in examples 2C and 2D. He would label the chord in example 2C as a 5 little diminished circle 7. So let's take a minute to unpack this odd label. The capital Roman numeral 5 means that the third of the chord is a major third. So that accounts for the G and the B. The little diminished circle doesn't mean that the triad is diminished, because the triad has a major third. What it means is that the fifth is a diminished fifth. So we have this strange group of notes that aren't really any kind of triad. It's a G, a B, and then a D flat. And notice again that diminished third from B to D flat. And then finally there's a seventh, and that tells us that there's a minor seventh in the chord. So the full spelling of the chord is G, B, D flat, F. I believe that 5 diminished circle 7 and 5 diminished circle 4-3 are weird and confusing labels. It makes it seem like there's a diminished seventh in the chord, or it makes it seem like there's a diminished triad, and there's none of those things. And so for that reason, I prefer, and I will use my labels, which I think are more widespread, the 5-7 flat 5 and the French augmented sixth. However, if you use Mr. Roy Frankoli's labels, I will know what you're saying, and I will mark your answer correct. Next, I'll be looking at some examples in the textbook, and I'll be doing these in a sort of funny order because I think they'll flow a little better. If you have your textbook, please know that we'll be looking at examples 27.11, 27.9, 27.10, and then finally 27.13. So you might want to get your book out and turn first to example 27.11. And example 2711 simply gives us more examples of the 5 augmented triad and the 5 augmented triad with an added seventh. But these are in a different key, and I think they show us some important things. First of all, here we are in the key of E flat major, and in the 5 chord, the augmented fifth is shown as originating from a passing tone motion. We have chromatic passing motion from F to F sharp to G. And then in the next example, we see what would happen if we simply rolled that chromatic passing tone into the chord and went ahead and made it a B flat augmented triad. And then in the final example, we have the 5 augmented triad with a minor seventh. And again, we can see that characteristic augmented sixth interval, A flat and F sharp, both of those notes resolving to the G, which is the third of the 1 chord. Let's go next to example 27.9. This shows another augmented chord. It shows a 1 augmented chord. And what's going on here is that we're going from a 1 chord in measure 1 to a 6-6 chord in measure 5. In measures 3 and 4, we again have this passing tone motion. The C sharp is a chromatic tone filling in the whole step between C natural and D natural, but it turns the 1 triad into an augmented triad. Here's what example 27.9 sounds like. And now we'll look at example 27.10. We're in the key of F major, and there are quite a number of 5 chords which are 5 augmented triads or 5 augmented triads with added minor sevenths. Take a look in measure 17, for example. We have the chords C, E, G sharp, that's the augmented triad, and then the added seventh, B flat. The A is a non-chord tone. What kind of non-chord tone is it? I'll give you a hint. It's approached by leap up and resolved by step down. If you said that it's an appoggiatura, you're right. You could also call it an incomplete neighbor chord. So this 5 augmented chord with a seventh resolves not to a 1 chord, but to a 5-7 of 4. Then we go back to the regular 5 chord, and we go to a 1 chord, which sounds a little peculiar because it has a D flat in it. In fact, we might hear this as a 1 augmented triad if you understand the D flat to really be a C sharp. In measure 21, we have another augmented 5 triad, C, E, G sharp. It resolves to a 1 chord in measure 22. And the final chord is also a 5 augmented triad. So listen for these different augmented triads.
Reason.
And the last example we'll listen to is example 27.13. We're in the key of B minor, and we have one of those chords with a lowered fifth. Think of what the 5-7 chord is in the key of B minor. It would be an F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E chord. F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E. Well, what Schubert has done here is he's using the lowered fifth, a C natural instead of a C sharp. Mr. Roig-Frackeley has labeled the chord with his preferred label. He's labeled it as a major 5 chord, but with a diminished fifth. So you've got that funny combination of the major third, F sharp, A sharp, plus the diminished fifth, F sharp, C natural. And then it also has a 7th, which is E. The chord is in second inversion with the C natural as the bottom note. My preferred label for this chord would be to call it a French augmented sixth. It is the French augmented sixth chord that we would have in the key of E, where the C natural is lay, the F sharp is re, the A sharp is fi, and then the E that we have here is the do. So either label is fine. I recommend that you think of this as a French augmented sixth chord, but one that is transposed so that it resolves to 1 instead of to 5. But listen for the very intense chromatic flavor of this chord.
Und ringt die Hände vor Schmerzensgewalt.
Okay, and that does it for chapter 27.